Welcome to Sleepy History Stories. Before we begin, you are gently invited to share in the comments where you are watching from, what time it is for you right now, and any quiet thoughts you may be carrying into this moment. Your presence adds to this calm space of shared reflection. Tonight we drift slowly back to the year 536 AD, a time when the world shifted in subtle yet dramatic ways. The sun dimmed, the skies grew heavy, and a chill settled over lands far and wide. Daily life carried on beneath these strange skies, yet people lived with quiet uncertainty, as if the familiar rhythms of the seasons were no longer entirely dependable. From distant villages to bustling towns, farmers measured their crops against clouds of ash and shadow. Merchants moved along streets where the light seemed muted and the air felt cooler than it should. Families huddled around fires, their eyes reflecting both fear and adaptation. Even as rulers debated, armies marched, and trade continued, the common people adjusted quietly, learning to endure without understanding fully why the world seemed altered. This story will carry you through the subtle changes that rippled across continents, the dimming of the sun, the failed harvests, the slow spread of disease and famine, and the way communities adapted, endured, and survived. Throughout it all, we will move gently, wrapped in calm, rain-filled skies or the soft crackle of fire, observing history as it unfolded in human lives rather than in dramatic spectacle. The year began quietly, as all years do, with the familiar rhythms of life moving beneath the rising sun. Farmers tended their fields with steady hands, drawing water from rivers and canals, planting grain and vegetables in the season's usual order. Merchants opened their stalls along familiar streets, arranging cloth, pottery, and food with careful precision. Children ran barefoot across worn paths, their laughter soft against the muted hum of village life. Life, for the ordinary person, seemed as it always had been. Yet soon, subtle changes appeared in the skies. The sun, which once rose with warm brilliance, now emerged dim and pale, like a faintly glowing coin lifted in morning haze. Its light no longer carried warmth or certainty. Shadows stretched oddly across the land, and even midday felt as though wrapped in thin mist. Villagers whispered to one another, uncertain whether the fading light was a sign, a trick of weather, or merely the mood of the season. Farmers noticed their crops growing slower, their fields less vibrant than in previous years. Rain patterns shifted without warning. Rivers rose and fell in irregular rhythms, sometimes too little, sometimes too much. The soil seemed resistant to familiar methods, and seeds that once sprouted reliably now took longer to emerge, testing patience and endurance. Families adjusted quietly, watering more often, pacing their work, and preserving what they could. Traders traveling between towns observed similar strangeness. Journeys that once took a day now felt longer under the dim sun. Roads seemed colder. Rivers, swollen or shrunken, delayed passage. Caravans slowed, moving with caution through the strange light, carrying supplies and goods, while wondering if the harvests from distant fields would arrive at all. Even in towns, daily routines carried a strange tension beneath them. Bells rang for the hour, markets opened and closed, meals were prepared over steady fires, but there was an unspoken awareness of uncertainty. People spoke in lower tones, gesturing to the sky, noting the odd patterns of sunlight and shadow. Lamps were lit earlier in the evening, and households added extra warmth to rooms. Every movement was familiar, yet tinged with caution. Stories began to circulate. Travelers spoke of a dark haze in distant lands, clouds of ash drifting silently across mountains and valleys. Some said the gods were displeased. Others feared disease or misfortune. No single explanation could account for the shifting skies, and yet the world continued its gentle rhythm. People endured, finding comfort in family, hearth, and the small certainties that remained, even as the light above betrayed the predictability they had always known. By mid-year, the haze had become a quiet constant. The sun shone weakly across fields, rivers, and towns. Crops were slower to mature. Some harvests failed entirely, while others were reduced, leaving families and communities to ration carefully. Daily life adapted, folding around scarcity, conserving energy, and preserving warmth. Parents spoke softly to children, explaining the unusual season with stories, songs, and lessons in patience. Even as rulers, distant armies, and traders noted the changes, it was the ordinary people who bore the subtle weight of these strange times. They rose, they worked, they ate, and they slept, carrying on in quiet resilience beneath skies that no longer promised the same light. Through these simple, enduring actions, life persisted, quietly resisting the shadows of 536 A.D., one day at a time. As the haze settled over the earth, the dim sun cast a muted light across landscapes that had long been familiar to their inhabitants. Mountains lost their sharp clarity, rivers reflected a soft, diffused glow instead of brilliant sunlight, and forests seemed to whisper under the weight of the pall. The people who had long depended upon the regular patterns of nature now found themselves adjusting to subtle but persistent change, shaping their lives around shadows that stretched, longer days that felt cooler, and an ever-present sense that the world itself had shifted. Farmers faced the most immediate challenge. Fields that once flourished now yielded more slowly, their green shoots tinged with yellow. The soil, though tilled carefully with steady hands, resisted growth. Farmers checked their seeds repeatedly, pressing them gently into the earth, whispering encouragement as if the plants could hear their intentions. Water was drawn with greater care from rivers and wells, distributed slowly and evenly to avoid waste. Families rationed grain and stored extra portions, anticipating the uncertainty that might come with delayed or failed harvests. Villages adapted with quiet ingenuity. People began layering their homes and workshops with extra insulation, stacking straw and cloth around doorways and windows to hold warmth in the face of chilly winds. Fires burned longer into the night, crackling steadily as families gathered to prepare meals that stretched ingredients carefully, blending grains, herbs, and small portions of meat or dairy. Smoke curled upward in soft spirals, lingering in the muted air, a faint signal of human presence amidst a landscape subdued by dim sunlight. In towns and cities, the effects of the strange year were equally profound. Markets, though still busy, began to feel slower. Merchants moved with careful deliberation, measuring supplies against the uncertainty of coming days. Goods were stored more cautiously. Prices shifted subtly, reflecting scarcity and the knowledge that some harvests might fail entirely. People spoke more quietly in streets and alleys, sharing rumors of poor crops, of ash clouds drifting from distant lands, of strange weather patterns that defied memory. Even in the midst of bustling markets, an underlying tension pervaded daily life, carried in every careful gesture and measured step. Trade routes, which had long connected settlements across valleys and along rivers, now faced new challenges. Caravans moved at a slower pace, weighing each load against the risk of shortage or spoilage. Bridges that once stood sturdy over swollen rivers now required constant inspection. Travelers paused more often, resting beside the pale rivers and noting the strange glow in the sky, wondering what had caused the sudden dimming that now touched every corner of their world. Even messages sent between rulers and administrators took longer to arrive, delayed by disrupted schedules and the quiet uncertainty that had settled like dust upon the land. Beyond the tangible challenges of agriculture and commerce, the year carried psychological weight. Families whispered together about omens, about the possibility that the heavens themselves had shifted, casting the earth into temporary disfavor. Stories passed from mouth to ear, carrying warnings, lessons, and gentle attempts at comfort. Parents reassured children that this dimming would pass, while still carrying in their own hearts a subtle anxiety, for they understood that survival depended on careful attention, endurance, and the quiet adaptation of daily life. Rulers and officials, though distant from most villages, could not ignore the changes entirely. Grain stores that once promised abundance now required careful management. Tax collection became more complex, for reduced harvests meant that both ruler and subject faced uncertainty. Administrators dispatched envoys to check on distant lands, to record levels of supply, to advise farmers and workers on what precautions could be taken. Yet these measures could only stretch so far, for the shadow that hung over the year touched every corner of the earth, beyond the reach of any single authority. Religion and ritual took on a heightened significance. Priests guided communities in ceremonies designed to appeal for light, for warmth, for abundance. Temples became havens not only for spiritual solace, but also for practical advice, as communities gathered to share knowledge about planting, storing, and distributing resources in the face of the unusual conditions. The act of offering prayers, incense, and symbolic gifts provided comfort, a sense of control, and a rhythm amidst the uncertainty, wrapping human lives in the soft continuity of tradition, even as the natural world faltered. Communities grew closer, relying on one another in ways that had previously been less pronounced. Neighbors exchanged food, tools, and knowledge. Elders instructed younger generations with gentle patience, explaining new planting strategies or food preparation methods to stretch limited resources. The bonds of daily life deepened, quietly reinforcing resilience and shared endurance. Even as distant rulers debated and distant armies planned, it was these small acts of care, teaching, and exchange that sustained ordinary life. Through all of this, the dim sun continued its slow, unchanging path across the sky. Its pallid light fell on tired hands, weathered faces, and fields of uncertain promise. Yet despite the shadows, life endured. Families rose at dawn to tend their duties, merchants arranged their goods, children played quietly near homes, and fires burned steadily into the night. The world had shifted, and yet humanity adapted, finding rhythm and purpose beneath the muted glow of 536 A.D., even as subtle famine began to creep into villages and distant towns, and as illness quietly touched communities weakened by scarcity, people moved with deliberate care. They ate carefully, shared generously, and preserved warmth and light in their homes. Each act, though simple, became a testament to endurance, a soft defiance against the dimming sky and the slow, creeping hardships of this extraordinary year. The year 536 had arrived with calm continuity, yet it would leave its mark on every human life, quietly reshaping routines, patience, and resilience across continents. And so daily life continued, threaded through uncertainty, shadow, and endurance, preparing the land and its people for the subtle, pervasive changes yet to come. As the year 536 pressed onward, the dimmed sun and lingering haze began to leave their subtle imprint on life in more tangible ways. Fields that had once yielded reliably now grew patchy and uncertain. Farmers rose before the pale light each morning, hands raw from tilling stubborn soil, eyes scanning for signs of growth. Seeds were planted carefully, counted one by one, pressed gently into earth that refused to nurture them as it once had. Water, drawn from rivers running lower than usual, was rationed more cautiously, with each drop measured against the unseen needs of the days to come. The first true failures arrived slowly. A patch of grain did not sprout. A field of vegetables wilted under gray skies. Families adjusted quietly, dividing what remained into smaller portions, boiling soups that stretched ingredients, drying herbs, and storing what could be saved for times when the earth would not provide. The act of preserving food became almost ceremonial, each grain carefully handled, each loaf sliced thinly and distributed with deliberate care. It was a slow lesson in endurance, in the quiet, patient recalibration of daily life. Villagers, sensing the subtle scarcity, gathered together more often to share both advice and meager resources. Neighbors traded small portions of grains, roots, and preserved foods. Stories of faraway towns and their experiences circulated around fires at night, soft voices exchanging not gossip, but guidance. When to plant, when to harvest, how to store, and which seeds might survive the weakened soil. Communities relied more than ever on shared knowledge, learning that endurance often depended on quiet cooperation rather than distant authority. In towns and cities, the effects of diminished harvests were felt in similar persistent ways. Markets grew quieter as traders returned with fewer goods. Prices shifted slowly but perceptibly, reflecting scarcity, while allowing families to stretch what little they had. Craftsmen found fewer customers able to pay full price, and artisans supplemented their work with simple domestic chores, reinforcing the rhythm of life centered on survival. Even streets that had bustled with casual chatter seemed subdued under the dimmed sun, voices lower, steps slower, gestures more measured. Disease, a quiet companion to scarcity, began to spread in places where nutrition was thin and water less reliable. Families tended the sick with gentle hands and whispered comfort, isolating the feeble as best they could. Herbs were gathered and boiled into teas. Oils and ointments were applied with care. The knowledge of survival was passed down from parent to child in long, deliberate hours by the fire, where stories were told not of conquest or glory, but of endurance, observation, and subtle adaptation to forces beyond human control. Even rulers and administrators, distant though they were, could not ignore these hardships entirely. Envoys traveled slowly across land and river, reporting on failing crops, reduced tribute, and rising anxiety in villages. Measures were taken to redistribute stored grain, yet supply chains struggled under the same shadow that dimmed the sun. Decision-making, while steady and deliberate, could only alleviate so much of the burden. the day-to-day endurance still fell to the hands of those laboring directly with the land, the water, and the hearth. Within homes, life became a rhythm of careful attention and small ritual. Children were taught the art of rationing from a young age, how to measure flour for bread, how to stretch soups, how to preserve what could be saved. Parents and elders worked together, demonstrating patience in every action, maintaining warmth, cleaning water, and conserving light. Even the act of lighting lamps and fires became a quiet discipline, each flame tended with care to avoid waste. Life, though shadowed by uncertainty, moved with deliberate grace. Temples and sacred spaces became places of both solace and guidance. Priests and spiritual leaders offered ritual and prayer, not for abundance alone, but for endurance and clarity. Communities gathered to mark the days, offering symbols of hope and persistence to the unseen forces above. The rhythm of devotion, repeated carefully each day, gave a quiet continuity to human life that persisted regardless of failing harvests or dimmed skies. By mid-year, hunger had settled quietly into many communities, yet it did not overwhelm completely. People adapted, learning new ways to prepare food, to stretch resources, and to sustain warmth and energy. Cooperation and shared knowledge became as vital as soil and water. Small acts of endurance, the careful stirring of a thin stew, the slow mending of a tattered garment, the gentle tending of a child's fever, became the rhythm of life itself. Through all this, the muted sun continued its path, casting a pale, consistent glow across towns, villages, and fields. Shadows stretched longer. Days felt cooler. Yet the quiet persistence of human life endured. Work continued. Families persevered. Fires glowed steadily in the darkened evenings. Life, measured in these small, deliberate acts, held firm beneath a sky that seemed to withhold its warmth, a reminder that endurance is often the most extraordinary feat of all. As the months passed in 536 A.D., the effects of the dimmed sun and failing harvests deepened across continents. Fields that had once produced abundance now yielded only fractions of what was needed, and every family adapted in ways both practical and quiet. Farmers rose earlier, their hands chilled by morning dew, moving with careful deliberation as they tended soil less willing to give life. The work of the day was heavier, slower, and more conscious. Each seed planted, each patch of earth tilled, done with a gentle, wary mindfulness that had not been necessary in previous years. Water, once plentiful and predictable, became a precious resource. Rivers flowed inconsistently, sometimes rising with sudden floodwaters, sometimes dwindling into shallow streams that barely reached their banks. Wells, long relied upon, were drawn with extra care. Each bucket of water weighed against the needs of cooking, cleaning, and tending animals. Children learned early the rhythm of scarcity, watching parents measure, ration, and repeat small, deliberate acts of preservation that became a constant thread in daily life. Markets reflected these subtle pressures. Merchants traveled with smaller caravans, their loads carefully counted and divided to stretch further. Prices shifted gradually, never dramatically, but enough that families adjusted their spending and consumption with quiet thought. People moved through streets with softer steps, voices lower in tone, gestures more measured. Daily transactions became a delicate balance of necessity and resourcefulness, an unspoken negotiation of survival woven into the rhythm of ordinary life. Hunger and illness, though slow and steady rather than dramatic, became companions in many households. Those weakened by reduced food supplies found themselves vulnerable to minor fevers, digestive issues, and fatigue. Families responded with quiet care. Soups made thicker with grains, herbal infusions drawn from local knowledge, warm fires maintained throughout the day and night. The smallest acts, a spoonful of nourishing broth, a gentle hand on a fevered brow, the reassurance of quiet conversation by lamp or hearth, became the essential work of survival. Even as communities struggled with these pressures, people remained attentive to the larger world around them. Stories of distant lands affected by the same dim skies traveled slowly along trade routes and riverways. Travelers spoke of ash drifting over mountains, of cold winds unusual for the season, of rivers that did not behave as they once had. These stories were repeated carefully within households, often as both warning and guidance, shaping choices and habits in the soft rhythm of daily living. Religious observance grew in subtle significance. Priests and spiritual leaders offered rituals and prayers aimed at endurance and protection rather than abundance or conquest. Temples became centers for advice, education, and communal support. Communities gathered for ceremonial meals and symbolic offerings, seeking calm and continuity and comfort in shared action. Even in hardship, rituals provided structure, reinforcing the quiet assurance that life, though altered, would persist if tended with care and intention. Rulers and distant administrators observed these changes with measured concern. Envoys were dispatched, decrees adjusted, and storehouses examined for redistribution of supplies. Yet despite these interventions, the majority of adaptation fell to local hands. It was in the daily, patient labor of ordinary people watering, sowing, cooking, repairing, teaching, that the world's fragile continuity was maintained. Authority could guide, but endurance depended on the rhythm of human diligence, persistence, and quiet resilience. By late autumn, the impact of the dimmed sun was unmistakable. Crops were partially harvested, stored grain rationed, and households prepared for the long, uncertain months ahead. Fires burned steadily, casting shadows that danced softly along walls. Families spoke gently to one another, sharing stories and small lessons in careful living. Children learned to carry and conserve energy, to observe and adapt. Life, though constrained, moved forward with deliberate rhythm, measured not in luxury or abundance, but in survival, attentiveness, and quiet cooperation. Through the haze of 536 A.D., people continued, threading each day into the next with deliberate care. They rose, labored, shared, and rested beneath a sky that offered little warmth, but demanded patient endurance. Daily life persisted, fragile yet resilient, a testament to the quiet fortitude of ordinary humans navigating extraordinary circumstances. Even as famine and fear lingered in the background, the slow, steady persistence of human habit and cooperation became the foundation upon which survival itself rested. As the year 536 A.D. drew toward its close, the dim sun and lingering haze slowly began to shift, though not entirely vanish. The strange darkness that had hung over fields, towns, and forests did not lift suddenly, but subtly, gradually, leaving people to adapt, endure, and reflect upon the trials they had faced. Life had been altered, sometimes in ways that could not be fully understood, and yet the world persisted, shaped quietly by both hardship and human resilience. Communities had grown closer through shared necessity. Families, neighbors, and even distant travelers relied on one another more than they had before. Food, knowledge, and labor were exchanged in careful, deliberate ways. Villagers taught one another techniques for rationing, for planting in weakened soil, for preserving water. Children, often the most observant, learned the rhythms of patience, the lessons of scarcity, and the enduring importance of gentle care. They absorbed both knowledge and empathy in the quiet patterns of everyday life. In towns and cities, artisans and merchants found new ways to sustain livelihoods amidst the uncertainty. Markets, though slower and smaller, remained hubs of connection and exchange. Craftsmen produced essential goods with attentive care. Potters, weavers, and blacksmiths maintained steady routines, finding continuity and purpose in the act of creation, even as scarcity touched their materials. Merchants adapted their routes, carefully tracking supplies and anticipating the needs of communities both near and far. Agricultural life, though challenged, persisted through deliberate attention. Farmers prepared for the coming seasons, with lessons learned from the dimmed sun and variable rains. Soil was tended with greater care, seeds chosen more thoughtfully, water distributed meticulously. The failures of earlier months became knowledge, gently woven into the long-term rhythm of cultivation. Families adapted routines, creating systems of storage, rotation, and shared labor that strengthened both resilience and community bonds. The physical hardships of the year were accompanied by quiet spiritual reflection. Temples and sacred spaces remained focal points for guidance, ritual, and solace. Priests and spiritual leaders offered ceremonies not of dramatic spectacle, but of calm reflection, endurance, and hope. Offerings were made with gentle intention, prayers whispered softly, and rituals performed with careful continuity. In these practices, ordinary people found reassurance, structure, and a sense of calm control amidst the uncertainties of the natural world. Rulers, envoys, and distant authorities continued to monitor the unfolding situation, yet the reliance upon local wisdom and adaptation had never been clearer. The strength of empire, of rule, and of organized authority could guide or redistribute, but it was the careful, patient, and persistent work of ordinary people that ultimately shaped survival. In kitchens, fields, workshops, and hearths, the quiet fortitude of humans proved both necessary and enduring. By the end of the year, life had adjusted to the altered conditions. Crops that had survived were carefully stored, meals stretched thoughtfully, and families huddled around fires with renewed appreciation for warmth, light, and sustenance. Shadows still lingered across the land, and the sun remained less brilliant than in years before, but ordinary life continued its slow, steady rhythm. People rose, labored, taught, shared, and rested, an enduring testament to resilience, adaptability, and quiet perseverance. The year 536 A.D. would be remembered not only for its darkness, chill, and scarcity, but for the way people carried on day by day, finding continuity in the ordinary, maintaining connection in the midst of uncertainty, and weaving endurance into the fabric of everyday existence. The shadowed sun left its mark on crops, communities, and memory, yet the soft persistence of human life, steady, deliberate, and enduring, remained the defining force of the year. And so, as fires crackled and lamps glowed in dim rooms across the continents, the people of 536 A.D. rested, shared stories, preserved knowledge, and prepared quietly for the seasons yet to come. In the dim light beneath the muted sky, life endured a subtle, unbroken rhythm of human spirit, care, and steadfast presence.